If you're in the market for a late model Corvette, well, hang on as we take a look and pit the C6 against the C7. Brought to you by Toys for Life C5. The first and second generation Corvettes burst onto the scene with iconic styling and great performance in the 50s and 60s. The third and fourth generations of the Corvette of the 70s and 80s continued with bold styling changes that you either loved or hated. But unfortunately, the emissions requirements of the era did not play well with performance. In 1997, the LS1 and C5 Corvette changed everything. Many would argue with the new 345 horsepower LS motor, the outstanding handling, and the great looks, that Corvette was finally a world-class sports car. And for some, it was the first time they didn't have to apologize for any aspect of their car's performance. Now, let's get to the C6 versus C7 comparison, as these are the two generations that most people seriously looking at buying a late model Corvette would dig deeper into. Let's kick off the comparisons with aesthetics. These are Corvettes, so you know they've got to be sexy. Starting with the front end, they're both front breathers and they're both beautiful. That's where the similarities end. As far as I can tell, there's three main differences that separate the front view of the Corvette C6 and C7. First are the headlights. The C6 uses kind of an older school design, which is essentially bulbs underneath of an acrylic lens. It sort of reminds me of a late 60s, early 70s E-Type Jaguar. The C7 lenses are more contemporary. There's nothing flat about them or round, and they implement LEDs as well as bulbs, similar to a late model Aventador. The C7 has a giant vent that's very good at removing air. Great for aerodynamics, not so much for aesthetics. The C6, by contrast, has a much cleaner and sleeker design. The last main difference in the front ends is the level of sculpting. The C7 has no less than 11 well-defined sculpted lines represented by the red dots. The C6 only has 2 red dots, which is an objective way of demonstrating how much smoother the C6 design is. So at the end of the day, for front-end aesthetics, I'm going to have to give the edge to the C7 Corvette. And yes, the pun was intended. Next, let's compare the side views of each generation. It's like watching David Banner turn into the Hulk, back to David Banner, and then back into the Hulk again. At the very back of the car, you've got the C6 with kind of the flat rear end and a glass hatch. By contrast, the C7 has got a rounder rear end like a C5 Corvette and a hint of a structural fastback design. Another main difference between the two is the size and the shape of the engine heat extractor, which carries down into the lower main body line, with the C7 being much more aggressive and in your face. Ultimately, the C7 side is way too busy for me and makes the car look way too long. The C6, on the other hand, is just the right blend of curves and style to make it look contemporary. The differences in the rear fascia between the two generations couldn't be more obvious. The C6 honors the traditional Corvette lineage, whereas the C7 clearly marches to its own drum. As for me, I prefer the C6. Hey, that does it for part 1 of this video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing and remember to hit the like below. Also, make sure you come back soon for part 2.